My name is Margaret Davies, a retired history professor from a quiet town in the English countryside. For as long as I can remember, I've been captivated by the British monarchy, not out of blind adoration, but because it represents centuries of history, power, and mystery. Among them all, one figure fascinated me most: Queen Elizabeth II. Her long reign, her stoic presence, and her ability to navigate scandals and challenges intrigued me deeply. I often wondered how she managed to carry the weight of an institution that shaped the fate of nations. But never, in my wildest dreams, did I imagine I would come face to face with her after my death. It happened on an unremarkable day, the kind where life carries on with its usual rhythm. I was driving home from a small gathering with friends when the rain began to fall. A soft drizzle that soon turned into a torrential downpour. The roads became slick, and the curves of the countryside more treacherous. As I rounded a bend, the glare of an oncoming truck's headlights blinded me. In a flash of screeching tires and crushing metal, everything went black. At first, there was nothing. No sound, no light, no pain. Just an infinite void. Then, as if someone had flicked a switch, I found myself surrounded by a brilliant light that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was warm, inviting, and filled with a sense of peace I had never known. The air hummed with a soft melody, a symphony without instruments, resonating deep within my soul. I realized, with an almost serene detachment, that I was no longer in my body. There was no fear, no confusion, only an overwhelming sense of calm. I took a tentative step forward, and the light around me shifted, revealing a vast space filled with towering shelves. They stretched endlessly into the horizon, their golden frames glinting in the ethereal glow. It was a library, unlike any I had ever seen. Each book seemed to pulse with a faint light of its own, as if it held a life within its pages. As I walked through the aisles, a voice called out to me, gentle yet firm. "Margaret." I turned, and there she was. Queen Elizabeth II stood before me, radiant yet composed. Her presence commanded respect, just as it always had in life. She wore a serene expression, her hands clasped in front of her, and her eyes, those unmistakable eyes, held a depth I couldn't fathom. For a moment, I was speechless. The Queen, here, in this otherworldly place, calling my name. It felt impossible, yet as I looked into her calm and steady gaze, I knew it was real. She was no longer the stoic figure I had seen on television or read about in history books. Here she radiated an aura of wisdom, love, and regret. "Your Majesty," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling. "I don't understand. Why am I here?" A faint smile crossed her lips, though her eyes remained serious. "You've been brought here for a reason," she said, her voice as measured and clear as I remembered from her public addresses. "There is something I must share, something I could not in life." I blinked, trying to process her words. But why me? I'm just an ordinary person. What could I possibly do? The Queen gestured toward the shelves around us, her movements graceful and deliberate. "Do you see these books?" she asked. "They hold the untold stories of countless lives, the truths that were hidden, the decisions that shaped the world. Among them is a story I could not tell, a story that now must be revealed." She led me through the library, her steps unhurried yet purposeful. Finally, we stopped in front of a single book, its cover glowing faintly with an intricate pattern of gold and silver. She reached out and placed her hand on it, her expression softening. "This," she said, "is my diary. Not the one the public knows about, the one I wrote in secret. It contains my thoughts, my fears, my regrets. Most importantly, it holds the truths I could never share. Truths about the choices I made to protect the crown, and the sacrifices that came with them. I stared at the book, its light reflecting in her eyes. "What kind of truths?" I asked hesitantly. She sighed, her gaze turning distant. "The kind that weigh on one's soul, Margaret. Decisions made in the name of duty, yet not always in the name of justice." I knew more than I ever let on about the events surrounding Diana's death. There were whispers, warnings, things I chose to ignore, because to act on them would have endangered the very fabric of the monarchy. Her words sent a chill through me. Diana's death had always been a source of controversy, shrouded in conspiracy and unanswered questions. "Are you saying—" I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to hear the answer. Elizabeth looked at me, her expression grave. "I'm saying that power comes with a price. There are those who will do anything to protect it, even if it means silencing those who threaten it. Diana was a light in a world of shadows, and some feared what that light could expose." The room seemed to grow heavier, the air thick with the weight of her words. "And now," she continued, "Harry and William are left to navigate the aftermath of those decisions. They carry my legacy, Margaret, but they also carry the burden of the truths I could not reveal. You must help them see the light through the darkness." Her voice was calm, but her message was anything but. I felt a deep sense of responsibility, as though I had been entrusted with a sacred task. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled gently. "For now, you must understand. Come, Margaret. There is more I need to show you." She turned and began walking deeper into the library, and though fear and uncertainty gnawed at me, I followed. The diary in her hands glowed brighter as we moved forward, its secrets waiting to be revealed. As I followed Queen Elizabeth through the endless golden aisles of the Celestial Library, I couldn't shake the weight of what she had just revealed. Diana's death, whispers of betrayal, and her own struggles with duty, all tied to a hidden diary she now carried in her hands. My mind raced with questions, but the Queen's calm and steady pace reassured me. There was more to come. We reached a quiet alcove where the air felt heavier, almost sacred. A single desk stood in the center, its surface glowing faintly. Elizabeth placed the diary down, and the golden light from its cover spilled across the room like liquid sunlight. She gestured for me to sit, and as I did, the pages of the diary began to flutter open on their own, revealing words and images that seemed to leap off the paper. "This diary," the Queen began, her voice softer now, "is more than just my thoughts. It's a record of the truths I carried silently for decades, truths that shaped my reign, for better or worse." I leaned closer, and the first page came into focus. It showed a vivid scene. Diana, standing in a grand hallway, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. Beside her was Charles, his face shadowed, speaking in hushed but tense tones to another figure I couldn't quite make out. "This," Elizabeth said, "was the beginning of the end. Diana had uncovered things about the inner workings of the monarchy, things she felt the public had a right to know. But she underestimated how deeply entrenched certain forces were in protecting the institution." The next page revealed a series of handwritten notes, each one in Diana's unmistakable handwriting. The words were fragmented but chilling. "Watched. Cannot trust anyone. Betrayal close to home. Must protect my boys." I looked up at Elizabeth, my voice trembling. She knew she was in danger? The Queen nodded solemnly. She suspected, and she wasn't wrong. There were those within the palace and beyond who saw her independence and popularity as a threat. Her light exposed shadows they wished to keep hidden. The diary turned another page, and this time I saw Elizabeth herself, sitting at her desk with a pained expression. Her voice, though steady, carried a hint of sorrow as she explained. "I was informed of certain actions being taken. Not directly, of course, Plausible deniability is the currency of power. But I knew enough to understand that Diana's position was untenable, and I made a choice to remain silent, believing it was for the greater good. Her words struck me like a blow. "You knew," I whispered, struggling to comprehend. "You knew what they were planning?" Elizabeth's gaze met mine, steady but filled with regret. "I knew pieces, Margaret. Enough to suspect, but not enough to act without tearing apart the very institution I had sworn to uphold. In my silence, I chose the monarchy over justice, and it is a choice that has weighed on my soul ever since." The diary continued to reveal its secrets: conversations between high-ranking officials, veiled threats, and calculated moves to isolate Diana. Each page seemed to thrum with the gravity of what it held. The final entry I saw showed Diana's funeral procession, the young faces of William and Harry etched with grief. "They lost their mother," Elizabeth said softly, "because the system failed her, and I failed her. Now, they must navigate a world shaped by these choices, and it is my hope that this truth will help them find peace." The diary closed itself, its golden light dimming as if it had exhausted its strength. Elizabeth sat across from me, her hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. "The monarchy survived," she said, her voice steady but tinged with melancholy. "But at what cost? Charles has taken the throne now, and William stands ready to follow. Yet the cracks remain, and the weight of these truths threatens to undo everything we have built." She gestured, and the air around us shimmered. Suddenly, I was no longer in the library, but standing in what appeared to be a modern conference room. Charles sat at the head of a table, surrounded by advisors. His face was lined with both age and worry, and the conversation around him was tense. "They've uncovered the letters," one advisor said. "If they go public, it could undermine everything." Charles sighed, rubbing his temples. "What would you have me do? Deny them? Attack my own son?" The vision shifted again, this time to William. He was alone in a quiet study, holding a folder in his hands. His expression was conflicted, torn between duty and something deeper. "What would she want me to do?" he murmured to himself, his eyes glancing toward a photograph of Diana on his desk. Elizabeth's voice echoed around me, though she was no longer visible. "William is the future of the monarchy. His choices will determine whether it survives or crumbles. But he is burdened by the same conflict I carried: duty versus truth. The question is whether he will have the courage to choose differently." The scene shifted once more, showing Harry speaking passionately to a crowd. His words were charged with conviction. "My mother believed in justice and truth. She knew the power of light to expose darkness. And no matter the cost, I will honor her legacy." I felt a surge of hope watching him, but it was tempered by Elizabeth's next words. "Harry's path is righteous, but it is dangerous. The forces that silenced Diana have not disappeared. If anything, they are more insidious now, cloaked in modernity, but just as ruthless." The vision dissolved, and I found myself back in the library. Elizabeth stood before me again, her hands clasped tightly. "Margaret," she said, her tone urgent, "the truths you have seen here are not just for you. They are meant to be shared, but the way you share them must be wise. The world is not always ready for the light, and those who bring it are often met with resistance." I felt a lump in my throat as I nodded. "I'll do my best," I promised. "But what happens if they don't listen? What happens if the truth only makes things worse?" Elizabeth smiled faintly, her expression filled with a quiet strength. "The truth has a way of finding its way into the light, no matter how deeply it is buried. It may take time, and it may come at great cost, but it will prevail." Her words lingered as the light around us began to shift, signaling that my time in this place was drawing to an end. "There is more I must show you before you return," she said, taking my hand gently. "Come, Margaret." Your journey is far from over. The golden light of the library began to dim as Queen Elizabeth guided me back toward the towering shelves. I felt a gentle pull, a force urging me away from this ethereal realm and back to the world I had left behind. My mind was overwhelmed by the weight of the diary's revelations, the secrets it held, and the warnings Elizabeth had shared. How could I, one person, possibly carry such a burden? Elizabeth stopped, turning to face me. Her expression was serene, yet her eyes held a quiet urgency. "Margaret," she said, her voice firm but kind, "you must remember that the truth is not always easy to carry, but it is always worth carrying." I nodded, though doubt still lingered in my heart. What if no one believes me? What if I can't make them see what I've seen? Her faint smile returned, and she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Speak from the heart. Share what you've experienced with humility and courage. The truth has a way of finding those who are ready to hear it. And as for those who resist, plant the seed. In time, it will grow." Her words filled me with a quiet resolve, though the task ahead still felt insurmountable. As she stepped back, the light around us grew brighter, and I felt myself being pulled away. The library dissolved into a warm, golden haze, and Elizabeth's voice echoed one last time. "Carry the truth. Margaret. For Diana, for William, for Harry, and for the world." And then, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital room replaced the glowing warmth of the afterlife. The sound of beeping monitors and distant voices filtered through the haze of my mind. I blinked, struggling to adjust to the sudden heaviness of my body. My chest ached, and every breath felt labored. But I was alive. "Margaret?" A familiar voice broke through the fog. I turned my head slowly to see my daughter, her face pale with worry. Tears filled her eyes as she reached for my hand. "You're awake," she whispered. "We thought we'd lost you." I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, and the words wouldn't come. Instead, I squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance that I was still here. My mind raced with the memories of what I had seen, the truths I had been entrusted with. It all felt so vivid, so real, yet the world around me seemed unchanged, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, I replayed the events of my near-death experience again and again. The library, the diary, the Queen's revelations, they were seared into my memory, as clear as the view from my window. But how could I share something so incredible without being dismissed as delusional? Who would believe that I had spoken with Queen Elizabeth herself and seen the secrets she carried? I knew I had to try. This wasn't just a vision or a dream. It was a calling. And no matter how daunting it seemed, I couldn't ignore it. Once I was discharged from the hospital, I returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. My quiet house, filled with familiar comforts, now felt like the starting point of a mission far greater than myself. I sat at my desk, staring at a blank notebook, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on me. How could I possibly capture everything I had seen? How could I convey the enormity of the truth without losing its impact? I picked up my pen, my hand trembling slightly, and began to write. At first, the words came slowly. I described the library, the golden shelves, and the feeling of peace that had enveloped me. Then I wrote about the Queen, her calm yet urgent demeanor, and the diary she had shown me. As the memories poured onto the page, my hesitation faded, replaced by a deep conviction. This was my truth, and it needed to be told. I detailed the revelations about Diana, the betrayal she had faced, the danger she had sensed, and the forces that had conspired against her. I wrote about the Queen's inner conflict, her choice to prioritize the monarchy over justice, and the regret that had followed her into the afterlife. And finally, I described the visions of William and Harry, their struggles to carry the weight of their mother's legacy, and the hope that the truth would one day set them free. When I finished, the pages were filled with my account, raw and unfiltered. I stared at the words, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. This was only the beginning. But how would I share it? Who would listen? The doubts crept back, whispering that no one would take me seriously, that I was just an old woman with a wild story. Yet deep down, I knew I couldn't let fear silence me. The Queen had trusted me with this truth for a reason. I started small, reaching out to local newspapers and online forums. I shared my story not with arrogance, but with humility, knowing that some would dismiss it outright. And while many did, there were a few who listened. People who, like me, believed that some truths were too important to stay hidden. Weeks later, as I sat in my living room, a quiet knock on the door startled me. When I opened it, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a simple note: "We are listening." I held the note tightly, a chill running down my spine. It wasn't clear who had sent it or what it meant, but it reminded me that my journey was far from over. The truth had been set in motion, and its ripples were beginning to spread. As I sat by the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees, I felt a quiet sense of hope. The Queen's message, Diana's legacy, and the truths hidden in that celestial diary, they were no longer buried. They were out there, waiting to change the world.